Hey there, my name's Jordan, and I'm a financial coach and financial planner. And today I'm your host at the Reimagine Wealth podcast, where we share imperfect stories about embodying our values, weaving just system level safety nets, and working to build the world that we want to live in, one where we all get to have our needs met and thrive. Let these be shared learnings that allow you to more deeply explore, experiment, and shift, and that allow us to unlock our collective knowledge. This show is ad-free and available to everyone, and it wouldn't be possible without your love and support. So if you like what you're listening to, please like, review, subscribe, and share the show with those in your community. If you're able, please support my work to produce the show by becoming a paid member of my Substack, which starts at $6 a month. Link to that and more is in the show notes. Thank you so much for listening. And now let's get into the show. In this episode, you are going to hear from another co-conspirator in the financial industry, Ari Rosenberg. Ari uses she and her pronouns, and similar to myself and some others you've heard on this podcast, like Anna Finkelstein, also came into finance through the lens of wanting to use it as a tool to move towards a just transition. So Ari works with clients to help them achieve their financial and life goals, and previously was the development director for organizations that were focused on ending the racial wealth gap, addressing housing insecurity, and increasing food security. In those roles, Ari used her knowledge of fundraising and financing to ensure that each organization could fulfill its mission. Ari holds a CFP certification and works as an investment advisor representative at Chicory Wealth. For Ari, a balanced life includes values-driven work, community engagement, gardening, joyful cooking projects, long bike rides, and spending a lot of time in the woods. Ari is on the board of the Community Empowerment Fund and Transplanting Traditions Community Farm, and is actively involved in Mothers for Ceasefire and the North Carolina Triangle Jewish Voices for Peace chapter. Ari is someone that I met while I was in the process of becoming a radical advisor. Ari went on a similar path. We also co-hosted a workshop about becoming a radical advisor. So we are all people who have been on a similar path, a similar journey, and are trying to figure out how we might be able to use finance as a tool that we can remold to transform what might be possible. One other thing that I will add as a disclaimer and disclosure for this episode is that Ari and I talk about the resolution filed by Bernie Sanders to call for disapproving of $8.8 billion to be sent to Israel to drop bombs on Palestinians. Ari and I discussed that, which is, as of this recording, as of April 1st, it's up for a vote this week. By the time that this podcast reaches your ears, it probably will have already passed. So noticing the time difference between time of recording and when you hear this may have gone through, it may not have gone through. So when we're talking about that, just be aware. And I will let us get into the conversation now. Hello, Ari. Welcome. And as you know, as someone who's been listening to the show, usually we get started by I have guests share their money story. So I'm wondering if you could share your own money story in your own words, as much or as little as you'd like to introduce yourself today.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, Jordan. Happy to be here. My money story starts with where I was born. So I was born in Louisville, Kentucky, while my parents were in med school. And they chose Louisville in part because they didn't want to have any debt when they finished med school. And at the time, the early 1980s, in-state tuition for medical school was around $3,000 a year, which might be shocking to hear now. Both my parents came from wealthy families. My mom grew up in LA, going to an elite private school. My dad grew up in Sacramento, went to public school. And both of their families had this belief that the parent should pay for college education. And it was like the understanding that they would then do that for their kids. So going into med school, they didn't have debt and didn't want debt. but did choose a medical school based on that idea and like how to make it affordable to them. Obviously, $3,000 in the 1980s is different than today, but that's still cheap even then. So I grew up, I started in Louisville and we moved around a lot, Ohio, Texas, and Arizona as my parents progressed through their careers. And I saw how wealth grew. They're both doctors. Obviously, they went to medical school. And so as they progressed through their careers, they started making more money. Our houses got bigger. The neighborhood demographics shifted where we were living. I could participate in extracurricular activities, as many as I wanted, as long as I could get a ride there because they weren't available to give rides because they were doctors. Honestly, the way I felt is I really didn't like moving around. And I felt like my parents were putting their careers and like making money ahead of our family's well-being. So I think this really influenced my own money journey and how I look at money even to this day. I don't think money brings people happiness. And so I'm not striving to make the most money possible or to have the grandest career possible because I experienced that money was bringing isolation and distance. And that's not what I wanted. It's not what I wanted to participate in. So when I graduated from college with no student debt, because my parents did pay for it, just like their parents paid for them, I did 2 years of an AmeriCorps Vista stint. And for those who aren't familiar, AmeriCorps Vista, honestly, I don't know if it still exists in the current government, but is a government program like the Peace Corps, but in the United States. You get placed at different nonprofits and agree to work for a very low wage. At the time, I believe it was around 14,000, maybe $15,000 a year. And you get access to either some like student loan forgiveness up to a cap, or you can use that same amount of money towards future education. But it's a very frugal way to live. And I honestly loved it. I was in Maine, so the cost of living was lower there anyway. I, along with 3 other friends, started a housing co-op, so I ensured I had a stable and affordable place to live, and I felt like I could really focus on trying to do more good than harm in the world, and that's something that was important to me as a Jewish person, just growing up with the understanding of tzedakah, which is justice in Hebrew, and I really felt like throughout my 20s, I embraced that life and was like, I can be frugal, live the life I want to live, not have debt myself because I was privileged to have my college paid for and started this housing co-op. So, housing, which is most people's like largest cost if they don't have children, even that was affordable. So that allowed me to start thinking about money in different ways. And when I did have excess, how did I want to use it? And so I loaned money to friends who were starting community land trust and to another cooperative project in Maine called Local Sprouts and really try invest in my community as much as possible. And I would say I stayed on that trajectory like through my 20s. I moved to Philly at some point in there. And at some point around my mid-20s, before I was 30, I kind of recognized that I wanted to have a kid. And I was like, "Oh, shit. I probably need to make more money if I wanna have a kid." And I wasn't partnered at the time. It was like, I wanna do this thing. So I started shifting my work away from like programmatic roles in nonprofits to more administrative roles because administrators get paid more. That's a whole nother topic of conversation we could get into another time. But pretty quickly, I was able to increase my income by about 50% just by stopping doing the good work, the direct human connection work, and doing the soul sucking, life crushing work of begging for money and managing money for nonprofits. Obviously, that felt very draining. And it eventually, I would say I got to a point where I wasn't like personally burned out, but I just felt so much that nonprofits were just part of this capitalist system and that they were intentional band-aids. They weren't capable of changing the systems that needed changing in order to actually address housing security or food security or ending the racial wealth gap, which were like the main focus of the nonprofits I was working on or working with. After my kid was born, I decided to move to personal finance because I was like, I need to go where the money is. The people that have money, whether or not they want it, have power and can choose to do different with their money. I also missed the like human connection, right? That you get when you're a programmatic worker at a nonprofit and you really don't get as an administrator at a nonprofit unless you work for a really special kind of nonprofit that I've never seen. I basically took 2 years of studying for the CFP, doing the education, taking the test, getting the Series 65, and was lucky enough to land a job. I'm a financial advisor now at a firm called Chicory Wealth. And kind of like you mentioned, actually, in your own money story on this podcast, I had to take a pay cut to move from my job as an administrator at a nonprofit into finance, which I think most people are surprised by. But you can make a decent amount at nonprofits, if you work for the right ones. But I was able to do it because by that point in time, I was partnered and we don't have debt. She owns our house. And honestly, my in-laws provide a lot of free childcare for us. So we were able to make it work even with a pretty sizable pay cut at the beginning. The only other thing I really want to add to the money story, unless you have questions, is I feel like in my 20s, I was really able to live out my values in this like really strong way that I was like really proud of. And as I've aged, I've found that more difficult for a variety of reasons, not because I don't still have the same beliefs, honestly, but I think there's just in some ways so much pressure to be, I don't know, normal. What that means, but like to be normal in the US. And so my family and I do still try to lean into our values in certain ways, which I'm going to share because I feel like it can be helpful. We were inspired by some of our friends. So about every other year now, we do this like no buying new things thing where like you can buy food, you can buy like soap, whatever, but we try not to buy like new clothes. You can buy used things, but not made new. So we have mottos for these things. So we did no new 2022 and then no more in 2024. This year, we're doing Look Alive 2025. We're trying to get fit again because after having a kid, that's been difficult, but it's not financial. It's more physical. Anyway, all this is to say, I feel like in many ways, I wish I was as principled as I was in my 20s and that I try to allow my 20-year-old self to inspire myself now by doing these commitments every few years to ensure that I'm watching my consumption.
Thank you for sharing so much of that. I am absolutely loving the mottos. So good. I'm like, ooh, what will 2026 be?
Yeah, we haven't decided yet, but I will let you know.
Yes, I do have questions. You mentioned, especially the part around embodying your values as someone a little bit older in their adulthood is harder. And that's something that I think is true for most people. A lot of organizers and activists that I've been in a relationship with have either gotten burnt out or kind of fade away from movement work. And I think it speaks to something so much more than just like an interpersonal or an individual dynamic. I think it's systemic. I'm curious, where do you see systemic factors coming into that, if at all?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. I don't necessarily have a good answer, but I do think even for those amongst us who are pushing back against ideas of success in capitalism, it is really hard not to embrace certain ideas related to that. And I know, like, for myself, I want to be good at my job, right? I want my coworkers to think I'm good at my job. I want my boss to think I'm good at my job. I want to feel good at my job, right? And part of being good at something in this system does mean you advance in a certain way. And as you advance in a certain way, I feel like you make these subtle adjustments to show up as this new person, whether or not you want to or mean to. An easy way that I think about it is even like in clothing, right? I did not care what I wore at all in my 20s. Like I was not fashionable. I didn't care. And now, I mean, my partner will be happy to hear, I guess, because she's like the stylist amongst us. But I do care. I care how I present, right? I want to look a certain way. It's not always nice, let's be real, but I want to present a certain way. And I'm like cognizant. That's just one example. But I feel like within this system, we make these like small changes in ourselves where they seem small, but over time, all of them together, it adds up to recognizing I am not the person I used to be. Even though, again, I think that person is awesome and I still believe in her. I think some people, as they age, they're like, oh, I was naive or whatever. Now I'm an adult and I know better. I don't feel that way. I feel like my 20-year-old self was right. And I try to honor them as much as possible.
Totally. And I think what's also true is the world has gotten harder. It's harder to meet our needs. We have to work longer. That's been conditioned into us of what does it mean to be a good worker. I saw this meme. It like really hit me because I was like, oh, this is so me. It was like a person saying, oh, I'm so over this. And then it's like, as they continue to work as hard as they possibly can.
Totally.
See, I see me. That just makes me think about that. I have one more question for you about your money story. A lot of the folks that I work with, that I'm in conversation with, are curious about the more practical, like, how do I make a decision around redistribution, solidarity economy investing? So, hearing in your own money story, you made a decision to loan money to people in your life, which can be really personal, can be hard. Money things tend to bring up other emotions since it's so embedded into our own worthiness and our ability to meet our needs. So I'm just curious if you could share anything about how did you make that decision and how did you distill for yourself whether it was the right decision for you to make at the time?
Yeah, at the time, I just honestly wanted to be helpful. Like the loan to local sprouts was like $1,000. At the time that was a lot of money for me, let's be real. But it also, in the scheme of the world, I knew wasn't that much money. And I believe in cooperatives. I would love for this like worker owned cooperative that makes food to exist. It seemed easy, and then similar with the land trust was my friends, they were trying to buy this land that they lived on, that their neighbor owned, and through a land trust so that no one would own it. I mean, the land trust would own it, but no individual, and it just met my needs for how I look at the world, and especially around land, like, who are we to own land? That just seems ridiculous to me. I mean, I still think it's ridiculous, even though obviously as a financial advisor, I support clients in buying properties as part of my job. I think morally, it, like, doesn't make sense to me as someone who loves the environment. And then more into the question on redistribution, I try to give away about 12 to 18% of my gross income every year as part of a commitment to like reparations and wealth redistribution. And I still feel weird about like who gets to decide, who am I to decide where the money goes. For a number of years, when I first started doing it, I gave to a local organization. I was still in Maine at the time. The organization doesn't exist anymore, but it's called the Visible Community. I was involved with it, and it really focused on supporting low-income folks in the neighborhood I lived in. I believed in them, and was like, "This needs to exist where I live." And when I moved to Philly, I might have still given to the Visible Community for 1 or 2 years after that, but I was like, "Okay, I need to figure out something, this is my new community. What do I care about, or where should the money go?" I shifted it. I started giving it to the Movement for Black Lives. When they put out their policy platform, I was like, yes, this is everything I believe in and want. And it's not my decision where the money should go. So if I give it to the Movement for Black Lives, they can decide how this money will best be used. In more recent years, I've been giving it to Palestinian led organizations because of the genocide in Palestine, and feeling like as a Jewish person, an anti-Zionist Jewish person, it is my responsibility to do something. Again, not my decision where it goes necessarily, but I need to believe Palestinians and what they're saying and what the needs are. So I think in general, that's how I try to show up with money. I still feel weird about it, right? I'm still deciding which organization it goes to. And I give in other places. Usually I do one bigger donation to one of those groups, and I care about abortion access and food security, and I give to a local indigenous group where I am as like a land tax. So there's other smaller things that I do as well, but I feel like it's so important for us to remember that the money's not ours. Like that none of it's ours. The land's not ours. And Obviously, I need money to live just like everyone does, but I don't need to be hoarding it. I don't need more than I need, whatever that number is, right? And so having this goal each year of giving it, again, it's between 12 and 18%. It varies a little bit based on like how much my partner's making or other things. I try to hold myself to it because of this belief. I shouldn't just be looking out for myself and my family, but I need to look out for everyone as much as I can. And obviously, I don't make enough money to literally look out for everyone. So this is like a symbolic way of looking out for everyone.
Yeah. Thank you. And it's like, it's an art, it's not a science. There's no rule we can follow that means we're morally good people, as much as I wish there was, because that would be a lot easier. Um, and I think what I hear a lot in that is relinquishing control, relinquishing power, giving that to folks who are directly impacted or who have intersecting systemically oppressed identities. So hearing that in your story and the fact that it's a contradiction because we live in this world where it's like, yep, we have power to decide where money goes, and we ultimately still have to steward that in some type of way currently. It also makes me think about, I'm currently rereading the book Wealth Hoarders by Chuck Collins, which is all about how the ultra high net wealth folks, basically the history of how the ultra wealthy have been using tax efficiency, I'm putting that in air quotes, tax efficiency, tax avoidance strategies to offshore and hide trillions of dollars in wealth. And so much of that is related to our tax system. And we're in this current administration where I absolutely hate how our tax dollars are being used. And I want to have more of a say in how those get reallocated. But it's also almost tax season. So I'm thinking a lot about taxes. And I'm also thinking about them as a way to do mass wealth redistribution on a national level. I don't know of something else that does it at that scale. So I'm curious, especially given your role in finance, your experience in working in, living in the belly of the beast. How do you think about the role of taxes in our society?
Yeah, good question. And I should, my compliance officer would be happy for me to say, I'm not giving any tax advice or investment advice. So I will answer this question, but just this is not actual advice, and ask a tax professional directly for your own tax advice. I have to say that. So, yeah, I think the tax system in the US is tricky, right? It's sold to progressives as this tool for wealth redistribution. And in theory, it's an opportunity for people who have more to pay a higher percentage into a pool that somehow helps all of us. That's what it's sold as. And that's cool. That's not how it works in the US. I think it kind of is how it works in other countries. I'm not an expert in other countries, but my understanding is that in other countries, there all are actual progressive tax systems that actually benefit everybody. But our tax system has a lot of loopholes, as you mentioned. And I mean, some people wouldn't say they're loopholes because it's just the tax law, right? People are using the like actual tax code to prevent paying taxes on billions of dollars. And so one easy example to explain is what happens when someone dies and assets are inherited by someone else. I'm just going to use a made up example, but we'll pretend that my grandparents bought stocks and they bought them in the like 1940s. Okay. Let's pretend, right? When the value of the stock was incredibly low and they didn't sell it. And pretend they died this year, which my grandma's still alive, so I don't actually want to pretend she dies this year, but this fictional grandparent dies this year, and pretend that I inherit this. Any growth that's happened on this stock, the tax, it's erased when I inherit it. So even though they might have paid $5 for the stock, and again, I'm making this up, right? Say they paid $5, say it's worth 200 per stock today. That's a huge increase, right? Today, if I inherit it through death, I am not taxed and my basis increases to what it is today. So if I hold on to it for my whole life and give it to my grandchild, they will also not be taxed, and their basis will increase to whatever it's worth when I die. So it's just creating more wealth being passed on tax-free.
Could you share really quickly for listeners what a basis is?
Oh, yeah. Basis is typically how much someone paid for something. For a stock, it's how much you paid for it. Or if you inherit it, originally it's how much they paid for it. But what happens at death is there's a step two. People say step two basis because it can be up or down. But in this case, in stocks, it's almost always up in this moment in time. You can call it a step to basis, but you usually mean up. For a house or what's called real property, it's what you paid for your house, but you can add to your basis any improvements you've made on your house that will increase the value of your house over time. So you can't add like painting the walls. That's a temporary thing. But you could add to your basis if you change the HVAC system, for example. Anyway, so our tax code has this thing built into it that allows for massive transfers of wealth that are not taxed. That's one way that people who might have been millionaires a few years ago could be billionaires today and not have paid taxes on that increase in income. It works differently if you gift to someone during life. Then your basis isn't increased. So then that capital gain becomes yours. But if you wait till you die to pass it on, then you still get to benefit from this step up. So all that's to say, billionaires, the Americans for Tax Fairness and ProPublica, of course, have done research on our tax system. And billionaires often are paying between 0 and 3% of their income to taxes, while the average American pays around 15%. So it's not a progressive tax system, though everyone calls it that. For me, I don't think our tax system is progressive, and I wish it was. Like, I wish we did have a system that was a tool for wealth redistribution.
Yes, me too. I wish that I had a say over where our tax dollars were going and that the American people, everyone in this country, whether you're quote unquote a citizen or not, had a democratic say in how those funds are allocated. We look at how much funding is going to the military, towards funding genocide, towards, these tech billionaires and their cronies are collecting salaries on slashing our social services right now. I'm wondering, do you think that our tax system can ever be, for me, I'm like, let's totally transform it. Do you think there's room to transform it? And if not, like, what do you think a reform could look like?
Yeah, great question. I do believe there's a way to transform it, but it does mean that our politicians have to let go of their beliefs about this country and how it works. We're told, the news talks about how much we pay for housing vouchers and SNAP benefits, which people call food stamps, right? We're paying so much for that, or Head Start, which is preschool, how much we're paying for Medicaid. The news loves to talk about this. But the reality is 46 to 50% of what we're paying in income tax is going to pay for current and past military expenses, which does include veterans and veterans benefits because we're traumatizing our veterans by sending them to war. We need to take care of them, which I agree with. And it also includes 80% of the interest on the debt. The reason our debt is so high is because of military and our military expenses. So most of that's like 46 to 50% that's half the budget is going to that one thing, which is not just the Department of Defense. Let's be clear. That's Homeland Security. It's nuclear weapons, which belong in the Department of Energy. It's the NSA. It's the CIA. It's military portions of many departments' budgets. On the other hand, taxes have been something I've been interested in for a long time. And I've participated in what are called penny polls. They're a public gathering of information of how would people want to use their tax dollars. So to your point, like if the people can make the budget, what would the people want? And so I have some data from, let's see, 15 penny polls that happened in Maine, some in 2011 and some in 2016, which I like that it's these two different years because just thinking back in time, 2011, Obama was president, 2016, Trump administration, right? And so about 2,300 participated in these 15 polls in rural towns in Maine, so like Monroe and Hope, and in urban settings like Lewis and Portland. For those who don't know Maine, Maine is a very economic and politically diverse state. They currently have a Democratic governor. They previously had a Republican governor. Susan Collins is the Republican senator. They also have Angus King, who's an independent. So it's not a blue state. It's not a red state. It's an all over the place state. So it's a pretty good demographic if you're thinking about like American people. And not surprisingly, military and defense, depending on the poll, got between 0.3 and 6.8% of the pennies. Okay. They didn't get 50% in any of the polls. They didn't even get 46. The ones that were the highest and like looking quickly, environment and science, dare we say climate change, right? Got between 9.3 and 19% in the polls. Healthcare got between 10.8 and 17.5%. Veterans benefits got between 6.3, 13.2. Yeah, and food and agriculture, which includes SNAP benefits, got between 8.1 and 16.3%. Education got the most, 14.9 to 23%. And they're trying to get the Department of Education right now, right? So what I'll say is the American people, kind of regardless of if they're Democrats or Republicans, if they're wealthy or poor, seem to want our money to be going elsewhere, which is why I do think like radical change is possible in our budgeting process. And therefore, hopefully in our tax system too, right? Like, I think if you asked the everyday American who should be paying the most in taxes, they would probably say billionaires. I don't know that. I don't have data. I would just be shocked if the answer was anything different. That's not what's happening. And it's not what's happening on purpose. In 2017, the first Trump administration, there was a big tax bill, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, and that's still in effect today. The provisions, some are permanent, and I'm using quotes. People can't see it. I'm saying permanent in quotes because Congress can change tax law at any time, so nothing's permanent. And some expire at the end of this year, which is why the Trump administration is trying to push through a new tax bill, and it's why they're gutting agencies to try to find trillions of dollars of, quote, savings because they have to pay for the new tax bill. In the first tax bill, the one we currently have, the 2017 version, the Tax Policy Center found that today, so the 2025 version of the cuts, okay, are saving the top 1%, which is like someone who makes around $838,000 a year or more, is saving them $61,000 a year. And it's saving what they call middle quintile, which is someone making roughly $53,000 to $92,000 a year. It's saving them $910. I just feel like that makes no sense, right? Like, why are the people that have the most money benefiting so much more, so disproportionately more? $61,000 versus $910. There's not even 1,000 at the end of that one. So to me, I'm just like, no, the whole system needs to be overhauled. I'll just add one more thing, which is I have a coworker who's from Australia who told me once that she just thinks this tax system is hilarious because the IRS knows how much money you owe, but they make you fill out all these complicated forms, and oftentimes people have to pay someone to do it. And if you do it wrong, you're penalized. And then they tell you if you did it wrong or you did it right. I guess in Australia, they just send you a bill for the amount you owe. I don't understand. Why don't they just tell you the amount you owe since they already know? And I'm like, yeah, we need a tax system that's so simple. People don't need to do, I don't even know. It's not even math that we're doing to fill out the tax forms, but it doesn't need to be so complicated. It could be pretty simple. And it could go to pay for the things that we want to pay for, which from that penny poll, those 15 penny polls, is not the military. People don't really want to be paying for genocide, but here we are.
Yes. And wow, it's like, it's actually possible to just send people a bill. Imagine our technology has gotten to that point at this time. Wow, what a dream. It makes me very angry because, as you mentioned, the rest of the population takes on the burden by the top 1%, the top 0.001% evading their taxes. And even a 1% tax increase, it might not sound like a lot. And I know it's positioned as like an additional burden, but it actually is disproportionately so much money that these billionaires did not earn. They extracted, they exploited to make that possible. And now they're exploiting us even further to either cut our public funding for social services like schools, like we're seeing right now, or by making the rest of the population take on the additional tax burden to fund things that we don't even want to fund. I'm just going to do a little plug. If anyone here has not read Chuck Collins' Wealth Hoarders book, it is really great and describing how this is actually possible. And part of it is by making the tax system so complicated and essentially having enough wealth to hire a team within the wealth defense industry to actually go create these weird laws and these weird legal loopholes that you can then just move your money somewhere, write it off. So anyway, I'm getting on my soapbox, but just
Yeah.
anything that you want to say to that?
Yeah, I'm just like, it's disturbing because for the most part, everything that's happening is completely legal, and to there's not a willingness to care. Right now, you can that's obvious in politics in America, there's no willingness to care, but at this point, Republicans are gonna do whatever Trump wants. Trump wants this. They're gonna give it to him. They don't care about their constituents, many of whom are representing incredibly rural and poor districts, right? It's not like their constituents are a lot of billionaires who want this. Let's be real. That's not who voted for them. But they're gonna do it because the king is telling them to, and Democrats, I don't know where they are, but they don't seem poised to step up and do anything different either. They haven't proposed something different. I would say the only exception that people would point to is Bill Clinton balancing the budget. But otherwise, the Democrats are, and I mean, we can talk about on the backs of whom too, right? How many Black people did he lock up with the war on drugs and the war on welfare? Bill Clinton was not good for low income people. And I'm not posing that he was. I'm just saying the Democrats have let the Republicans like win this dialogue saying that the Republicans are for small government, want to spend less, et cetera. But historically, there's no data proving that to be true. Instead, what they're doing is they're spending lots of money to give themselves tax breaks and to cut all programs that benefit other people. Someone would fact check this and be like, well, they didn't cut all of them. But yeah, the point is made that they're trying to reduce them. And the Democrats don't change the narrative, right? There's like the whole Biden administration, these tax cuts for billionaires were still in effect. And the Democrats, even when they had both chambers and the president, did not try to pass another bill to change anything about the Tax Cut and Jobs Act. They let it go because they didn't have to pass another one because it wasn't expiring. But they could do more than nothing, right? There are opportunities for them to wield power in a way that's productive, and they don't take them. I think politically, there needs to be a huge shift from both parties, right? If they want to show that they care about the American people and like how our money's being used.
Absolutely. And speaking of opportunities, I'm wondering, do you see any opportunities to address systemic conditions or seeing and hearing from the tax justice institutions that you named? Where do you see opportunities to start? I think there's a long term, like maybe in our lifetime, our tax system is completely different and it's a tool for the people. And then in the shorter term, like in the next few years, like where do you see opportunities?
In the short term, I would say the most opportunities are locally. So in your local municipality, in your state, I mean, if you look at the New York City mayor's race right now, it's pretty exciting. There's a Democratic socialist who's running. And if you live in New York, I can't tell you who to vote for, but highly recommend. He's campaigning on increasing access to education, free childcare, I feel like on the local level, there's a lot that can be done, not just in New York, but other places where municipalities can choose to provide pre-K, provide healthcare. Some states do have healthcare plans already. Vermont's an example. In the near term, pressure locally because nationally, there's just not the appetite for it. I think obviously a tax bill is going to be put before this Congress before the end of this year because the current one expires. And I would say call your senators, call your reps, and tell them what you actually think, right? I don't think there's likelihood that anything will change on a federal level in the near term. But I think if we don't participate in pressuring, then we're losing our opportunity to extend our voice again. And in the long term, on the federal side, we need actual progressives. I don't know what else to say other than that, unless there's more appetite for actual change and not just reform. We're just going to keep getting what we have had, which has never been a tax system that's meant for the working class. It's never has been. To have the changes that we need, I personally think we should have universal health care. College should be free. Education, preschool should be free. There should be affordable housing in every community in this country. Whatever we need for those things to exist is what our government should be doing. And the only way those changes will be made is if we make those changes through pressure and by electing people who actually care. Unfortunately, in this moment, it's definitely not who's representing me in Congress, but I think that's where the work needs to be.
I also know there's moves to have additional political parties like Working Families Party, PSL, Party for Socialism and Liberation. It's like the question of like, how do we make our tax system more democratic, but also recognizing the fact that the funds are there to do all of the things that you just named. If we either reallocated our military spending, that would address these things. It would address the systemic factors regarding homelessness. It would improve the quality of lives of people in this country dramatically. And we wouldn't need to work as much.
Yeah. I mean, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I know I've seen a lot of stats since the genocide in Palestine has been going on, which the US is funding through our tax dollars. Each time there's been money sent to Israel for military spending, people have posted on Instagram, right, different graphics of what this money could be used for instead. And literally, if we just reallocated that money, it's enough to pay for everything that I said. And that's not getting rid of the military at all, right? It's just not giving money to an occupying government to enact a genocide on another population. So to me, this seems like a no-brainer. You don't even have to get into the argument about whether or not we should reduce our actual military operations. We could just reduce someone else's military operations that we're paying for and pay for all the things that I listed. I'm laughing, but I'm crying. You know what I mean? It's just so disheartening that it's like we don't even have to actually have a debate about what we think of war to be able to make these changes. All we have to do is have any sympathy for Palestinians, and we could have universal health care. I know people don't want to think that those two things are related, but they are. And like, this is how like intersectionality works, right? It's all related. Our government is choosing to fund the annihilation of Palestinians instead of caring for us. That makes no sense at all to me. It never will. No one could explain it. And I know that it's true, right? That like they could easily say, we're not going to send the weapons. In fact, Senator Sanders has a joint resolution for disapproval going through this week. Call your senators, tell them to support it. If we stop sending money and bombs to Israel, we could have free healthcare, free college, preschool. To me, it seems so simple, I don't know why it's so complicated, but I'm not a politician, so I don't have to worry about making promises I'm not gonna keep.
Yes, and plus one to the Call Your Senators. It's $8.8 billion, which will go towards additional, I think it's like 35,000 bombs that will be dropped on families, on children. So it's a very simple, it shouldn't even be in Congress. It shouldn't even be an argument. And yet here we are. And I think it really points to the fact that like we, the constituents, we, the people, we do not have power in the system and we need to begin reclaiming it. We need to completely disrupt the status quo. And that's obviously not something that's going to happen tomorrow. But to your point of there are ways to start locally, there are ways to build relationships with your congressman. There are ways to also build something new that's outside of this system too. There's multiple strategies that can be paired together to start shifting. I'm also curious, Ari, knowing that you and I both work in the finance sector, and I keep talking about this book, which really connected the dots for me, just like how the police and the military are essentially the artillery for our state. It allows them to maintain power. If the cops dissented, if our soldiers and military dissented, the state would have no power. Nothing happening right now with the Trump administration would be possible. Similarly, I think of the finance sector, lawyers, accountants. We are essentially the artillery for tax evasion, for wealth hoarding. I'm curious how you see our role as being accountable to a just transition, being accountable to social justice as someone working within the finance industry.
I would say that's a very good question and obviously a complex question to answer. I see our role in many different ways, and so I'll try to highlight the ones that are coming to mind immediately. One is the investments themselves, right? At Chicory, our CEO, Maggie, has a phrase, you can't do no harm on Wall Street, but you can do a lot less harm. And so we try to do a lot less harm. We control what's in our portfolio. We don't use mutual funds. We don't use ETFs because you can't control what's in them. And right now, our portfolio is BDS compliant, and that's on purpose. We don't want to be funding the military. We don't want to be funding the genocide. And our clients don't have to, right? And you can still make money. You can still have a competitive return. You don't have to sacrifice returns to have a little bit of decency. So that's one is the investments. That's the on Wall Street piece. Again, this is not investment advice. This is just answering a question. But there are also off Wall Street investments, and we do offer that to our clients when it's appropriate. But CDFIs, local cooperatives, there's other funds that people can invest in to build renewable energy and affordable housing and to help with ESOP conversions. And these are all examples of things, regenerative agriculture, of actual investments that our clients can or have made. Those are off Wall Street, and those are hopefully using their money to do good things and build the world that we want. So that's the other side, the investment. I would say the other piece to this, maybe the more important piece, I could argue, is to help clients realize how much is enough for them. So I know, Jordan, you talked in your own sort of money story, questioning how much is enough for you and doing actual calculations and figuring that out. As a financial planner and a financial advisor, that's what I need to be helping my clients figure out, how much is enough. And if they get to whatever that is for them, and I think to the point you made in your story, enough is different for everyone based on their medical needs and how big their family is and the lifestyle choices they want to make, et cetera. There's not one number that we can just like rubber stamp on everyone. But once we help clients figure out how much is enough, helping them not try to keep building more than they need and help have those conversations about where could this money go if you aren't the one that needs it, and make really planned, intentional choices into giving. Again, it's client by client because it has to be something they're self-directing and interested in. You know, there's not one answer that works for everyone. It has to be personalized. But I think there are definitely ways to work with clients to engage in these questions and to have these conversations. And as fiduciaries, recognizing it is our job to help clients make the best decisions for themselves, which doesn't mean making the most money they could possibly make. That's how I see it as an advisor, is like really helping clients figure out what their actual financial goals are and focusing on those goals, and not this grow my assets indefinitely forever, because that's the only possible answer. Like, I just would say most of our clients, that's not their goal. That's not what we strive for if that's not their goal. So I think that's important in thinking about how can we be more ethical in the belly of the beast.
Ugh, truly, yes. The contradictions that come with that. And it's true. We do get a choice in terms of how much harm we get to be complicit in. And there's no perfect, oh, everything's great. I haven't done any harm and I'm a perfect person. The status quo continues. It doesn't really, this might sound bleak, it doesn't really matter if you as an individual are the only one able to do it. It does matter when you compare your actions with that of many, many others. And I think we can probably agree on, or this is again, not investment advice, not saying this is what's true for you or not, but there's probably a collective agreement that $1 billion is way more than enough. You will not be able to spend that in your lifetime. So that feels like a good soft boundary of like, can you spend the money in your lifetime? Realistically, maybe there's something about enoughness there. And if not, then what's the need that we're trying to meet? What's the purpose of this? If it's lineage, what's the lineage that you want to have? Do you want to be contributing to a future that's unlivable for people, that your children and descendants are ashamed of or feel guilt over? Yeah, I'm curious what you think about that, Ari. And I'm also curious how you mentioned coming up with your own idea around enoughness. Like, how do you orient to that?
Well, it's funny. What you just said made me think of Warren Buffett publicly moved his money to cash a few months ago. And a lot of our clients, with the market has, in case anyone has been watching, the market's been unpredictable and chaotic. No surprise, it's dropped a lot in recent months. A lot. Obviously, that's relative. It hasn't dropped that much compared to what it could do. It's all relative. But it's made some of our clients ask about moving to cash. And one of the responses that one of the advisors I work with gives is Warren Buffett is a billionaire, so he can afford to have his cash making 4% and still just live off of it. No problem. Our clients are not billionaires. And can you live off of your account making 4% if you're in retirement? Say this is most of your income is coming from this. And I would say the answer for most of our clients is no, not long term, maybe in the moment, but not long term. But it gets to your point, right? Which is if you have enough money that you could just literally keep it under your bed and be fine forever, that's enough money, right? You don't need to take stock market risk. And again, this isn't investment advice. You do whatever you want or what your investment professional tells you to do. I'm not telling you what to do or even suggesting anything, but I'm just saying there isn't enough point, right? And I feel like there's some that are obviously past enough, and then there's some that are more nuanced. To get to your question about like in my own personal life, what does enough look like? I think that's a really good question. My partner and I, we have a general philosophy that we don't want to be stressed about money. And that includes having too much money, which I would find very stressful, just to be clear about this conversation. Having not enough or too much, either way, stressful for me. We don't want to be stressed about money. We want to be able to like eat healthy foods, like buying produce, which can be expensive, right? Is important to us. We have friends that are farmers. We want to be able to support them and just eat as much fresh vegetables as possible. We just want to like be able to have fun in our life. We don't need a lot of money to do those things. And part of it is because of the privilege that we have. We don't have debt. We don't have a mortgage on our house. She bought our house. Her parents helped for like $70,000 in 2011 because of the 2008 housing crash. Like a bank owned this house. Over the years, She and then we, like, have paid friends to fix it up. It was kind of a wild house when she bought it. It had a jungle mural on the wall. Now it when people walk in, they're like, "Wow, this house is so nice." But it's very small. It's a one-bedroom house with a loft. I think it's 900 square feet. Anyway, it's perfect for a three-person and a small dog family. It has land, so we have a lot of gardens and a creek and all these things. All that's to say is we know we don't need more than what we already have, and it is a weird thing. Honestly, we couldn't sell our house and buy another house where we live, which is weird to think about. We couldn't afford another house where we live, but the house we have is great. I don't have a number that we've reached, but I would feel like where we're at right now feels like it's working pretty well for us, and unless there's, like, a huge shift, an unexpected shift, I would say, then where we're at feels like enough in this moment.
And it makes me think a lot about, I think I've mentioned this in other episodes too. It's just like being satisfied, being content with what we have, and being able to practice that and really embody that. There is one question that I meant to bring up earlier. I'm wondering, Ari, if you know about war tax resistance as a strategy to combat some of the ways that our tax dollars are being used to reclaim the American public's power over our tax dollars. So could you explain in your own words what it is and what do you think about it?
So my understanding, war tax resistance, I think it's been around the US for a while. It was popular during the Vietnam era, and it's potentially a form, I would say, of, like, civil disobedience, not engage in paying for war, and my understanding is there's a few ways to do it. If you don't make enough money to be taxed, that's a legal way of doing it, right? Is sort of legally suppressing your income to be below the taxable amount. You would still have to file taxes, but wouldn't owe anything. And the taxable amount changes, right? Based on if you're a single filer, you're head of household, or if you have a kid, if you qualify for the earned income tax credit or you don't. So I can't give like a number for what that is because it depends on your other situations that affect your taxes. Then on the civil disobedience side of things, my understanding is there are ways to basically where you don't fully pay taxes in order to make a point, right? To show that you don't want to comply.
Do you see that as a viable strategy for reclaiming power over our tax dollars?
It's a good question. I don't know. Okay. I'm going to use a sort of analogy that's similar. I'm a vegetarian. I don't eat meat, right? If I'm the only person that doesn't eat meat, that makes no difference, right? The same amount of industrial cattle and pig and chickens are slaughtered every year. It's adding methane into the environment. The animals are not treated well. There's bird flu outbreaks. There's potential medical outbreaks that move over to humans. But if we're all vegetarians, then what happens? If we're all vegetarians, there's no need for industrial meat processing. There is no bird flu. There is way less methane going into our atmosphere. So I think it's probably like that. If there's just one person doing it, it won't be effective, right, in that way. And if we all do it, how could you ignore it? And, you know, not advocating for that, but I just as a point, I feel like it seems to me very similar to being a vegetarian.
That feels really real. Also, as someone who's been a vegetarian for more than a decade. Spoiler alert, sometimes I cheat now, but to meet people.
I cheat once a year.
Is there like a special day that you do it?
It's not a special day, but so I have family that lives in Maine. I used to live in Maine, and my uncle David has lobster traps and an oyster farm just for like himself. It's not a profession. Anyway, so if I'm in Maine and he just got some lobster out of the Daramuscata River, I'm going to eat that.
Totally.
Yeah.
And so your point earlier about that you can do a lot less harm, like you're still doing a lot less harm. That
Yeah.
feels real. Ari, I just want to say thank you for being here. I know we've covered so much, and I just want to make space for any final things that you want to share or phrased in another way. If you could wave a magic wand, what do you wish listeners of the show already knew about?
This conversation makes me think, and maybe most listeners of the show already know, but just makes me think about the small things that the individual choices that we do have, things we can control. And it's like banking at credit unions instead of multinational banks keeps more of your money in your local economy. Similarly, it's like if you do have enough money to engage in like a certificate of deposit or a money market thing. And again, this is not investment advice, but this is just thinking of like community impact, like looking at CDFIs, which are community development financial institution, CDFI, thinking of shopping at local cooperatives, especially worker owned cooperatives. But just what are the things we can do to try to keep our money not just working for us, but working for the communities that we're a part of. And I would say, and not a part of. So as a white person, right? Like shopping at Black owned businesses, shopping at Arab businesses, like, making the impact that we want to be making. And sometimes things cost more when you make those choices, and sometimes they don't. But I promise if we do all our shopping on Amazon, that we're gonna destroy our local communities. Similar to Walmart, right? I don't know how in Walmart is now, but it feels to me like Amazon's more in than Walmart. But when I was in college, there were lots of campaigns against shopping at Walmart, and Amazon seems the same to me, but it's the same idea, right? It's like Walmarts came into towns and the local hardware store would go out of business. The local bookstore would go out of business because everyone was going to Walmart. And then when those stores go out of business, those people don't have jobs. And then they have to work at Walmart. And then they're dependent on Walmart for their income. So let's not do that. Let's keep buying as much as we can locally. I would say that's my takeaway for how each of us can, on our own, make an impact.
I just recently opened an account at my local credit union. And to your point, it's like the fees are actually lower. And what's so nice is they do not let me overdraft. They're like, do you just want to not let the transaction go through if you're going to overdraft? And I was like, that's possible to do here? That's amazing. And thanks for looking out. Like, it's basic.
Instead of charging you $25 for overdrafting, they could just prevent it from happening and charge you nothing.
Right. Yeah. It's so ridiculous. But anyway, that's another podcast episode. And to add on to what you were mentioning too, talk to people in your community about the choices you're making. Part of this project is to normalize people going against the system, people trying to shift things, and share that it is truly possible to make some of these things that completely disrupt the status quo, that completely go against what we're told is successful or what you're supposed to do. People do it. And when we do it, we get to model what's possible for other people and increase their likelihood of doing it too. So I think of that as blending our individual actions together to create a bigger strategy and move towards systemic change. So thank you, Ari. Anything else you want to add before we hop off?
No, I think that's it. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you so much for listening to the Reimagine Wealth podcast. You can find resources and links from today's episode in the show notes. And if you enjoyed this episode, please like, review, subscribe, and share this with those in your community. If you'd like to support the show, you can become a paid member of my Substack, which allows me to sustain this work and have more episodes to share in the future. Again, links to all of that and more are in the show notes. And until next time, I'm sending you resilience and warmth, and thank you so much for tuning in.